Hello, I'm Nancy Schertzing, Director of Restorative Approaches in Education for CDRUM. I'm excited to share with you information about a work group that the Maryland State Department of Education is convening to help schools integrate restorative practices and philosophy into their cultures. MSDE undertook this effort to comply with new legislation that we'll talk about in just a second. Let's begin with a little history of restorative approaches in Maryland schools.
And wanted to just give you a quick overview of the background that we come from here at the Center for Dispute Resolution. I am, as I mentioned, the Director of Restorative Approaches in Education, and my predecessor, Barbara Groeschel, was actually the person who chaired the statewide commission on the school to prison pipeline, where we really took a look at the data that show how devastating suspension and expulsion can be to a student's academic success. And so the CDRUM, my office, has been a part of this movement to try to bring more and more restorative approaches, restorative practices into our schools. And just to let you know that we are taking another step in doing that with House Bill 197, which was passed, I believe, in 2024, or perhaps it was 2025. Our guests will correct it for us. But what we are charged with under this law, or actually the MSDE is charged with under this law, is to develop guidelines for restorative approaches throughout schools and school systems. So this is not just about school discipline anymore. What House Bill 197 does is expand our focus to really integrating restorative approaches into our schools, into the cultures and the practices of our schools that are not just about discipline. What our goal is for the work group, which you'll hear about in a couple minutes, is to establish standards for what it means to be restorative, how we identify a restorative school, creating models for trainings or some guidelines for trainings, and then fostering restorative cultures, measuring the effects for restorative cultures in schools. So I want to do a quick shout out because our inspiration for this is Delegate Cheryl Pasteur, who has not only pursued this legislation over a number of years, but she comes to this successfully passing this bill, and her passion for this by means of being a former educator and a former school administrator. And so she is really just has taken a personal interest and is a part of this MSDE restorative practices work group. And it's been a delight for me to be able to share, get to hear her and share time with her on this work group. So that's enough from me about the background of this process, or well, kind of what brings us here today. We have two esteemed experts and who are also serving on the RP work group. Mr. Mike Mumford is Director of Maryland School Mental Health Programs and Division of Student Support and Federal Programs for the Maryland State Department of Education. He is also co-chairing this restorative practices work group with the Assistant State Superintendent of Education, Mary Gable. And I have to do a shout out also as a member of this restorative practices work group. I've been so impressed and really inspired by how MSDE really is committed to moving this ball forward, this integrating restorative approaches into the culture forward. And I think you'll be impressed also when you get to hear from Mike. And our other guest is Dr. Robin McNair. Dr. McNair, and I'm sure I'm going to call her Robin at some point because we have been friends for a few years, and I am honored to call her my friend and colleague. She directs restorative approaches in in Prince George's County Public Schools, and she is a Maryland State Leader for Restorative Approaches as well. So two esteemed restorative people that we have here with us. And I am going to go ahead and move so that you can hear not just from me, but you can hear from both of our guests. So my first question, Mike, is just to tell us a little bit about how MSDE is making Delegate Pasture's vision a reality. What are the steps that you are going through to comply with the law and also create this work group?
Thank you, Nancy, and good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the introduction. And yeah, we at MSDE are committed to restorative practices in schools. This is personally speaking, as a former teacher myself, this is very important to me and it's very important to the state. And really, a lot of what we have to do is tied to the legislation, right? We have to follow the law. So the legislation was very clear about getting input from the experts, from the state and national experts. So we decided to form a work group, right? So we needed to pull in those people that are actually doing the work. Those are the experts. So it's very clear, like the legislation says, like word for word, we need to make sure we're seeking input from educators and administrators who have effectively established and operated schools that integrate restorative practices into daily practices and activities of the whole school, and also get state and national organizations that have studied the effective use of restorative practices and established the most appropriate methods of integrating restorative practices in the school setting, right? Like that's from the legislation. So we did exactly that, right? We followed the law at the Maryland State Department of Education, and we got those people, right? So we do, and I'll put it in the chat of our kind of mini website around restorative practices, and it lists everyone who is in this work group, and those are the experts, right? So we worked with just about every member in that work group, either through consultation or they were members of the already existing restorative practice state leadership team. And we also got input from them and other members of the work group to see who else we can get in. But it really was following the legislation around making sure we're getting people that are doing the work, right? We wanted a diverse group of experienced implementers with real world experience, right? People that are actually in the schools, in Maryland, local education agencies doing this work. So that's kind of who we are, or that work group, and that's how we're going to get Delegate Pasture's vision a reality.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then can you give us just a little bit more of a background on who you invited? Like people get a sense of where we're coming from geographically, where we're coming from like professionally.
Right. So we got a lot of, so there's our restorative practice state leadership team are made up of LEA, so the local education agencies that are really kind of ahead of the curve that, took the former restorative practices bill and then utilize that to kind of get a jump start, if you will, on what I think that this legislation is currently doing. So we have a few members of, so we have LEA representation. So there's district level leadership. We have administrators, so we have principals and assistant principals and a teacher who are actually doing this work in the schools too, as well as different organizations like Seadrum, like yourself, and a few others that have experience kind of doing the implementation and the research. And we have a few national experts as well on our work group. So like I said, you can go, and I'll put it in the chat right when I'm finished speaking, and you could look and see exactly who those people are. And then we have a few internal MSDE people as well from our division that are, again, kind of supporting that work.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Robin. And Dr. McNair, why is this legislation important to Maryland schools and students, in your opinion?
So I believe that this particular legislation is valuable to Maryland schools because nationally we are fifth in student arrests, and we're sixth in student arrests for our children of color. And sadly, even with these statistics, there are going to be some who still believe in zero tolerance policies. So this statistic may not move them to make a shift. So when the state does get involved in policies and practices that are harmful to our young people, we see that they see it's a need for a shift statewide. And the shift does not need to be another strategy on how to use better discipline practices, but really about what is missing in our schools. And when I think about restorative practices, it is so much more than what some would call a discipline tool. It is an indigenous philosophy that really honors community and connection. When we look at the former bill, the heavy focus was on discipline, right? And when we came back from COVID, there was a lot of discussion around our youth and their mental health, our youth and their lack of social emotional learning skills. And they don't need another discipline tool. What they need is connection. What they need is community. And that's the underlying foundation of what restorative practices is. So I believe that this legislation is very valuable to Maryland as they take that shift to now look at how can we put this in place on a whole school level.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Robin, you and I have talked at different times about the difference between doing restorative discipline and being restorative. Can you just share just a little bit about a little more thought on that for me?
Yes, and if you don't mind me just sharing a personal experience. So when I was first trained in restorative practices, my mindset was, okay, so this is what I do. This is how I do it. This is what I do if this comes up. But I wasn't being the work. I still had that mindset around, I'm the teacher. This is what I'm doing. If you interrupt what I'm doing, then you're going to be removed, right? Totally opposite of what restorative is. But my mindset had not shifted. I knew that this work would be valuable to our youth, but my personal mindset had not shifted. And it wasn't until I went through a peacemaking circle training, which is part of restorative practices, that I really had the opportunity to examine my mindset. And it wasn't until I shifted my mindset and realized it was about how do you show up for these students? How are you in relationship with young people? How do you give students a voice? And how do you see young people when you look at them? Where I actually made that shift to being restorative as I'm doing the practices. And then it just became natural to me, in my interaction with everyone that I come into contact with, even adults.
I can vouch for that. I can absolutely agree that you are one of the restorative, like you are just the calm in the storm very often, and very restorative, and I appreciate that in you. So thank you very much.
Yep. Now I don't want anybody to get it twisted. Sometimes the storm do come up, honey. But I gotta quickly put my umbrella up.
Right. Okay, Mike, what does your team, your MSDE team, hope to see the work group produce? I mean, you've listed the different things that legislatively you are required to kind of herd everybody into producing, but what's the long-term impact that you hope that it will have?
Right. So I'm going to circle back to the legislation because that's actually what we have to do. Like it is law, and it's very clear on what the goals of this work group, what the goals of the legislation is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but then I do want to get into what are the hopes and what are the kind of the long-term aspirations of this. But there are kind of four key components, and Nancy did kind of highlight those in the very beginning, that the legislation requires that we, one, create a framework for local school systems to identify school personnel qualified to be like a restorative practice coach, a school-based person, right? There's district level, but then a school-based person that could really kind of lead that work at the school level. We also need to provide some model training materials so we can make sure that the schools and the LEAs are actually training in the right stuff as far as restorative practice. There's a lot of stuff out there that kind of can get misconstrued, maybe misinterpreted and misapplied. We want to make sure we kind of hone in on the key components of a training process. We also have to develop standards for, like, how do you identify as a restorative practice school, right? There was former legislation talked about restorative approaches. It was very general, very kind of loose, if you will. And we need to be more specific to really get to what is restorative practices and how are you implementing that in a way that, and I like to steal Robin's thunder a little bit, when it's not like implementing restorative practices, now you're doing it. It is a culture change. It is what you do. It is how you operate as I mean, at the school level, but also personally. You are a restorative person. You are a restorative school. So what are those specific standards, right? We can say do that, but we have to be specific on what are the kind of those standards. And then there are some intended outcomes, some performance metrics that were written into the law. Some of them do steer a little bit discipline focused, but not all. And we need to make sure that we reiterate that this is not restorative practice is not a discipline procedure. It's a cultural change. It's a cultural shift. It's a way of being. So like we have to follow those things. Those things have to be in this documentation, this guidance, if you will. So that's what the law says, and we have to follow the law. Like I said, MSDE, we follow the law. As legislation is written, that's what we implement. But that doesn't mean that we can't look ahead and look at kind of what those long-term goals are and effects. And what I think it is it becomes a little bit more now when a school or district says, I want to go on this journey, they now have kind of the roadmap, if you will, to go on to really, really affect cultural change. Like that's the long-term goal. Is I'm a school, I've heard about restorative practices, but I need to know exactly what that means. And that's kind of what our long-term goals are, is to get schools interested, to get districts interested, and then truly implement or truly become a restorative practice school to fidelity, right? There's a lot of programs, there's a lot of things out there, and schools kind of, take little bits and pieces, but are they truly doing it to fidelity? Are they getting the intended outcomes? They're not doing this because they have a high suspension rate. They're doing this because they want to help. They want to help students. They want to help their staff. They want to make their school a restorative, safe space for all to participate. So that's kind of the long-term goals. And again, I do want to stress that, like, to follow our progress, our meetings are open to the public. Anyone can attend. So in that link I put in the chat, and if you didn't get it, I can put it in again. That has a link to the meetings. You can look at our past meetings. You can look at the notes. You can look at the slideshow and any materials. And then there's a link for the next meeting to attend. And, most of these are virtual, and you can watch, right? Maybe not participate, but you can sit back and watch. And my email is available if you have questions or comments. You have concerns, feel free to email me and I can fill you in. But this is not a MSDE project. This is not certain school district project. This is a Maryland thing. And this is what we want to do for all of our schools, for all of our students and staff, right? It's not just for students, it's staff. It's everyone involved to make a restorative community. That's the long-term goal for real.
And I love that, Michael. Thank you very much. But I also want to ask you, I don't know how well our viewers or our participants realize there was no funding included in this legislation. Is that correct? Or does
That
MSDE?
is correct.
Okay.
And part of that, though, is this is not a mandate. This is not a mandatory thing. This is something that a school can choose. This is optional. But what we're hoping is, if you do choose it, that now you have some guidance and really some guardrails, if you will, to make sure that you're doing it the right way, if you will. That this isn't, again, just to address, we got a high suspension rate, so we have to do this because someone told us that, we have to do this. No, this is, if you're truly committed to cultural change, we can help guide that process.
And I think it's also important for people to understand that as you say, you are offering this, but you are not mandating it. That
Correct.
this is guidance from, it's wisdom from other school systems that have
Yes.
successfully integrated or are successfully integrating it.
100%. Yeah.
Good, thank you. I appreciate your clarifying that and your explanation and the effort that you put into it. Robin, as a work group member, what are you thinking? How are you feeling about the progress that we're making toward the goals that Mike has laid out?
One of the what I appreciate about this particular work group is that everyone on the work group has some experience in implementing restorative practices, whether it's on a district-wide level, school-wide level, or specifically in their classrooms. So it's really wonderful to be with a group of people who are speaking the same language that I speak when we think about restorative practices. People who understand that it is a way of being, and people who understand, people who come with a knowledge that I may not have. So, I appreciate the term expert. However, I see myself as a learner who is unlearning what I was doing prior to being restorative. And I'm continuing to unlearn some of those things that's been embedded within me that I'm not aware of. So having people who are in the same work, doing the same work with the same mindset, it continues to help feed me and, give me knowledge that I need. So I'm loving this experience with like-minded people on this legislation.
I love that you're saying you're unlearning previously, but then you are learning as you are living this as well, and the ability for other people to learn from you, and for me to be able to share some of my experiences, and here we've heard from, I think, 4 different schools. Is that right, Michael? Have you guys featured 4 different schools, restorative
Yeah,
approaches people?
that is correct.
Yeah, and each one has just a little bit different take, and just a little bit, I have learned and gotten some ideas from each one of those people that have presented. So thank you. Robin, will you? We're almost out of time here, I'm afraid, or we're getting close on time. But
Mhm.
we've got a couple minutes. Would you kind of take us out with what you hope the long-term impact will be? Mike has talked about kind of from MSDE's perspective, you as somebody boots on the ground who's doing this every day, what do you think the long-term impact could be? What do you hope it will be?
Yes, thank you for that question. I served on the first legislation in 2017, helping to create that comprehensive plan for restorative approaches. And one of the major pieces that was missing was the importance of building community and healthy ways of being with students and how to appropriately use the practices. So I'm hoping that this particular this plan that we're creating now will do that. My hope is that there will be more accountability on the state level to ensure that LEAs and schools will use this plan with integrity and fidelity. One of the things One of the pieces of the legislation that I love is having a restorative practices coordinator in every school. That is key to the success of this. And the success and the effectiveness of this. There is a concern, and my concern is, who's going to mentor and support the school-based coordinators. And I'm hoping that's something that we will discuss as we continue to meet on this plan. Many times that responsibility may fall on the principal, but I believe for consistency and fidelity, it needs to be someone who, maybe on the district level, who's been trained, who has done the work of RP, because we know that you would never call in someone who's never been trained on how to perform some type of surgery to be supervised by someone, or to supervise someone who is doing the surgery. If I made that clear.
Well,
So that is the long-term effect is the accountability piece and ensuring that schools will be implementing this with fidelity, of course, but with the integrity of what the work means.
Beautiful. And it kind of again drawing from your personal story, because your life has definitely changed with because of restorative approaches. Or what would you what is your hope that you hold in your heart for the educators who will be able to operate in these environments?
That they will go home every day with a smile on their face.
Is that possible, Robin? Come on.
It is possible. When I became restorative and was doing the work in the schools, I would leave schools so happy because I was not stressed out. I didn't have any negative thoughts about my young people because I now viewed them a different way. So there was nobody to blame for what was happening in my classroom except me. And if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do in terms of being this support for young people, being this space that could give them safety, then they're going to understand that they belong, that they're in community, and they will not want to hurt the community. And that's what we see sometimes. Young people not understanding how to express some of their sadness or their anger, so they violate the community. But when you give them space to hold their anger, to hold their sadness and process through that, then you won't see the behaviors that will harm the community because now you're going to use the community to heal the harm.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much. We do have one. I am able to see the chat here, and Mark offers a quick thought or comment. Years ago, I helped with attendance mediations in schools, and one of the metrics, I believe, Mark and all of our friends, and Mike, you could maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the metrics I think that MSDE is mandated through the legislation to look at for restorative school is student attendance. Am I right with that? How does that come in?
Yes, that is one of the metrics.
Yes.
Is attendance, yeah, and also teacher attendance as well.
Oh, okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Mark, thank you for your thought, and appreciate your raising that. And I also, Marilyn, we do have data. There's all kinds of data that Dr. Robin McNair offered. If you're interested, this is my email, and this is the website where we have some of that information. So those of you who have questions, I apologize, we're out of time, but I would welcome your questions, and I'm sure that if you have a question for Mike or Robin, they would be happy for me to forward it on to them as well. So shameless plug, I have to do this. On May 6th, we have another small but mighty restorative approaches in education webinar on a program that I'm working with the Aaron Levitas Foundation. We call it Aaron Talk, and it is sexual violence prevention with middle schoolers. And it has been just a really cool program that I think you might be interested in learning about. So thank you all for joining us. Mike and Robin, thank you for being here. Then I'm delighted you were here. Thank you all very much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
week.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.